Hello and welcome to the new series of Drishti IAS. I am Pooja. In this segment today, we are going to analyze those four major tribal uprisings that have been invoked by the youngest first tribal woman of India, Draupadi Murmu. Her story is very inspiring. Before I begin with the segment, let me tell you very important facts about Draupadi Murmu. She is the first tribal woman president of India. Along with that, she is also the first president of India who has been born after the independence of India. That makes her the youngest president of India. Now, let us talk about the different facts that we are going to have our impact upon. From the news to history of tribal rebellions in India, four important tribal rebellions that have been invoked by her. The causes and impacts will be discussed in this point only, and the shortcomings as well as the conclusion and the way forward. Conclusion and the question, beg your pardon. Now, four tribal rebellions that have been invoked by the youngest first tribal woman president of India, they are in a need to be discussed. Why? Because they are important from the perspective of UPSC prelims as well as mains. So, she basically comes from the Santhal tribe. She was born in Odisha. Draupadi Murmu became the only and the first woman in her own village to go to college. Then she went on to become a teacher. After that, a government clerk, and then entered into politics. After that, she also became the governor of Jharkhand, and now she has risen to the highest constitutional post in India. Her story is indeed inspiring, and we all should continue on to dream whatever dreams we have. Okay, so history of tribal and of rebellion in India, they revolve around the cultural, socio-economic fabric that the tribes in our country had. They mainly were dependent on shifting agriculture, hunting, fishing, and the use of forest produce. It was a very sustainable, close-ended economy for the tribes. And then, when non-tribals in the form of British, in the form of landlords, zamindars, and moneylenders came into their cultural and socio-economic structure, they started to feel very insecure. And with that, a loss of land for the tribal population also started to happen. The British wanted the forest land as well as the forest produce to benefit, of course, the British Crown. And that led to a loss of livelihood and the loss of land to the tribal population. They became landless, and many also became bonded laborers, because whenever moneylenders came into the picture, exorbitant taxation were put and imposed on these tribes. When they were unable to pay those taxes, they tend to become bonded laborers in lieu of whatever amount they couldn't pay. Okay, then joint ownership to private property. This particular point focuses on because the structure of the tribal population was such that they believed in the joint ownership of the land. But when land was made a tradable commodity, what happened? After that, private ownership started to begin of land, and hence they lost their livelihood, because forest produce it started to become or belong to a particular private property. And then the forest department was set up in 1864. Major acts came into force like Government of Forest Act of 1865 and the Indian Forest Act of 1878. After that, the monopoly of the British or the English moneylenders and zamindars, it became stronger on the forest lands and properties. And Christian missionaries were another very important part of this. Because of the evangelization of tribal population, what happened? There was a tribal upheaval in their cultural structure. Here we are going to discuss about four very important tribal uprisings that happened, that were invoked by the president. Okay, so first is of course the Santhal Rebellion or the Santhal Hul of 1855 to 57, just before the 2 years before the revolt, right? So it was led by Sidhu Kanhu, Chand, and Bhairav. From the Santhal tribe only we have our president. So be very careful, be very well read with Santhal Rebellion. Okay, and there were also two female participants very important female participants of this rebellion. Can you tell me in the comment segment who were they? Then let's see how many Santals were into the entire process of the rebellion. 10,000 Santals, they proclaimed a rebellion against the British, and it engulfed the area of Rajmahal Hills, Bhagalpur district and Birbhum as well. The government crushed it with a heavy hand. Why? Because of course the revolt was done in such a manner that it was violent. And whenever violence has been, taken as a resort to find any sort of rebellion, the government has an excuse to come down upon it with heavy hands, iron hand. The Santals were fierce fighters, but they were also honorable. Why? They usually used to hunt with bows and arrows, and the arrows had poison on its tip. But during the revolt, they did not use poison. Okay, the British passed the Santhal Parganas Tenancy Act in 1876, and it offered a certain bit of protection to the Santhals. Now, Santhals, why the causes? Let us see. It all started in 1832 when the East India Company demarcated the Damani Co. Now, Damani Co was the land which was supposed to belong to Santhals for their ecosystem, for their economic ecosystem and cultural ecosystem. And it was a promise of non-interference by the British in their land. But the British seldom kept their promise since the tribal times. So what happened? They started interfering into the entire Damani Co area as well. And moneylenders or Britishers and landlords, they were seen as outsiders or Dikus. Dikus were known as outsiders, and they were asked to rent to the Santhal were raised at exorbitant rates, right? Rent was hiked so much that they were unable to pay it, and whenever they were unable to pay it, the land was taken away from them, right? So this was the cause. The entire structure, it became very deteriorated, and the impacts of the Santhal rebellion, the passing of the Santhal Pargana Tenancy Act of 1876 offered certain protection, but this particular rebellion made it much more open to the entire India and the world that it is not just a caste. The rebellion or the fight was not over a caste, but a clash of classes as well, the British class and the tribal class. And it is also known as seldom the forerunner of the Naxalite movement in Bengal. Let us move on and talk about the Paika Rebellion, which was the second revolt to be invoked. Now it happened with Bakshi Jagabandhu Vidyadhar Mohapatra Barambar Rai, who was the highest ranking military general of Mukund Dev II, and they joined the uprising of Cones. The date of rebellion, the fight was 2nd April 1870, when Banapur was set on fire, and the revolt continued for 2 years after being overpowered by the British. And the causes were because they lost their estates. The same policy which was followed against the Santhals were also followed against them. New colonial establishments were made, and because land was hence made a private property, what happened? Land revenue settlement also came into the picture. When land revenue settlement came into the picture, what happened? That they lost their lands and livelihood, and after that they had nothing left, or anything wasn't left with them. So what happened? Rebellion started to begin. There were certain changes that were made in the administrative field. Changes were also made in the judiciary, because the Parsi was the court language. The Odias were not able to comprehend the court language. Whenever they are not able to comprehend any language, they won't be able to fight for their rights. So administrative as well as judiciary. The British government relieved local zamindars of their revenue burdens as well. Moving on. Next is the Kol Rebellion, which was led by Buddhu Bhagat, Joa Bhagat and Madara Mahato. It happened in the Chota Nagpur area, which was and there the Kols, they worked through a system of traditional chiefs. And because of that rebellion, they killed many outsiders and burned houses. It went on for 2 years. The areas that were at the core of this rebellion was Ranchi, Hazaribagh, Palamau and Manbhum. And it was later brutally suppressed by the British with their superior weaponry. It was so intense the rebellion was so intense that troops had to be called in from Calcutta and Benares to crush them. Moving on. Now let's talk about the causes for them. It all changed. Like for every tribal rebellion, the causes are the same. Loss of land because of the greed of the Britishers and not anything to fill up that financial vacuum. Moneylenders and the merchants, when they came along with the British, they started being greedy and snatching away land in a very systematic procedure. And of course, they became bonded laborers. So much so, 70% of them started becoming bonded laborers. Now let's talk about the Bhil uprising. So it happened in 1818. Who led it? You will tell me in the comment segment. Maharashtra's Khandesh region was the core area of the activity. Now, to counter the Bhil rebellion from 1818, the British government sent in forces to crush the rebellion, of course, and the forces compelled the Bhils to surrender. But it backfired because more bitterness came into the picture. They were never actually conquered. Moving on, if we talk about the causes first is the Treaty of 1818, which made the native forces of Mewar to get dissolved. And also, Bhil started becoming unemployed and no relief measures were undertaken to remedy the unemployment. And they started being deprived of their right to consume the forest produce, right? Because land became a private property and the use of various products were also, which they used to earlier use abundantly in the region, they were also deprived of that. And the impacts of the entire rebellion, it was such that political consciousness of the Bhils, they started becoming politically conscious of their own rights, and hence this particular population of tribes is very important today also in India. Moving on, if we talk about our shortcomings, the first shortcoming of any tribal rebellion is that it was localized in nature. Every tribal population had its own causes to rebel against, and it was first shortcoming is localized, and also they use outdated weaponry. And because the uprising were divided in packets, it was very easy to use modern weaponry against those localized tribal issues. And apart from these two, the tribes were not very well organized as the British were. So these are certain important shortcomings that we can write in our examination if a question is asked. Let's see our question. What is the question? Analyze the commonalities and the shortcomings of tribal movements in India in 250 words. Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much for watching. We shall meet again.